She stood in my doorway, holding her sling bag and phone, waiting for me to grab dinner with her. As I welcomed her inside my place for the first time, we made sarcastic jabs at each other, now common between us, and she sat next to me on the couch. Once I slipped on my shoes, we stood together, but I asked her to close her eyes first. "Give me your hand," I said. "Trust me." She laughed. "You're not going to murder me, are you?" I led her to the kitchen carefully, grabbed the vase of little sunflowers sitting on the table, and then held it in front of her. "Okay, you can open them now." "Oh my God," she whispered, her eyebrows raised. "They're so gorgeous." She admired the flowers, and then we looked at each other, unsure what to say next. But finally she took the vase, held the flowers close, and inhaled deeply, letting the petals brush the tip of her nose. "Please," she exhaled, "don't let me forget them when I leave tonight." 2 weeks later, the sunflowers are slumped over, once bright yellow petals, now shriveled. They were forgotten, and she never came back for them. What started as sarcastic observations about video games and seeing our therapists grew into something more than I expected the day we met. Sunflowers, I learned earlier that week, were her favorite. The flowers go back to a conversation we had at the movie theater, where she expressed frustrations about her ex while taking long drags from her vape pen. He hadn't made any gesture for her, big or small, in so long, not even so much as a movie date or a bouquet of flowers, which she would have loved. It made her feel so insignificant, like she wasn't even worth that small effort. The following day, I called a friend, someone I knew who loved plants, and asked if she had sunflowers in her garden. Unluckily, she did. She sent a photo, and I knew they'd be perfect. For the past couple of years, I've made a choice to live alone and not be bothered by roommates and relationships. Making personal connections was the last thing on my mind. All this for one simple reason. I constantly felt worthless. I could say this comes from the lack of friendships I have, but that's not true. I have many great friends. During the pandemic, I even reconnected with a few of my closest friends from high school and college. Guys I had a falling out with. It is them I talk to throughout the week. We play video games together, share stories, complain about work, and make horrible jokes. For me, I often speak of my loneliness. They know my loneliness because I can't stop talking about it. Being alone can be a good thing. It's a great time to reflect, and it also grants us the freedom to be our authentic selves when we are alone because no one can judge our actions. I believe every individual needs time to their thoughts, to not be bothered by one crisis after another, to recharge the mental battery. But the loneliness I experience comes from feeling worthless to others. And this comes from an experience that scarred me. My ex-fiance left years ago, suddenly choosing to cut off communication with me without explanation. I wasn't given any reason as to why. And when I asked for answers, she ignored me, leaving my texts and phone calls unanswered. It was the hardest time of my life, being with someone I deeply cared for, and then suddenly being ghosted. She didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. But one day, desperate for peace of mind, I called her, and she answered. I begged her to talk to me about this because I was hurting so much. I was in a very dark place, and I needed to get out of it. Thankfully, she agreed, and decided to come over and talk. When that day arrived, she broke down crying in the doorway, then hugged me for a long time. We sat down at the table for a few minutes, sipping coffee, and she hugged me again, this time sitting in my lap, her tears soaking into my shirt. But when I asked why she was doing this, she suddenly stopped crying and sat back in the chair, crossing her arms. She couldn't look at me even as I pleaded with her to tell me what was going on. Her phone, though, face up on the table, suddenly buzzed, startling us, and she snatched it from the table, pocketing it. I couldn't understand why she wouldn't tell me what was going on. Then she slid the engagement ring across the table and left. For so long, I dealt with heartache. I felt depleted. My creativity waned. It was as if she took the best parts of me when she left and never gave them back. I dreamed of better days, but only saw the gray skies and dimly lit rooms. The unanswered questions would begin to mold depression into my life and define how much I was worth. It's not fun to feel so connected to someone, then be walled off without much of an explanation. I never got an explanation from my ex. Only assumptions. But these assumptions weren't healthy. I continually wanted to know what it was that made her put up the divide and act like I didn't exist. The seed was planted. Maybe I'm not worthy enough for an explanation. Because of this, the next few years were filled with bouts of depression and anxiety. I constantly questioned the reasonings behind why she chose to leave. These thoughts were so invasive to my mind that I threw myself into work and volunteering, anything I could do to not think about what had happened. Yet, as I worked hard to tire myself out, I began to form new friendships with wonderful people. But the feeling of not being worthy for anyone never left. These new friends were uplifting and joyful, which helped me to regain a sense of my old self. But I had to decide what to do about my grief, since I couldn't pluck the memory from my brain and delete it. I talked to many who dealt with loss like mine, who never got answers. Whether it was a death, a fractured friendship, or a sudden divorce, they ultimately concluded that something like that doesn't leave you. It becomes part of you. You just continually work on yourself and grow from that experience. So I made a promise to myself that I would try to make those I cared for feel worth something, even if I didn't feel worth anything myself. Sunflowers will forever be branded deep in my memories. But if something good were to come from having them, it would be this. I hope, in that moment, when you took hold of the vase and breathed in the flowers, you felt worth something.